Welcome to the Blending In podcast, where I normally chat with innovative educators who are integrating EdTech. I'm your host, Ashley Yazarlu, and today on this final episode of Season 1 of Blending In, I'd love to share with you all my journey into starting this podcast and some of the most valuable insights that I have gained this last year since launching Blending In. By listening in today, you'll get an auditory peek into how I've blended in podcasting into my role as an EdTech Specialist, and how through this platform, I've been able to highlight some amazing educators who are providing incredible learning opportunities inside the four walls of their classrooms. So let's jump right in. In some form or another this year, I have been asked the question, why did you start this podcast? I did a short bonus episode, which I'll link in the show notes, where I chatted with one of my guests about this. But this chat was more of a brief overview of the why. I didn't really dive too deeply into the why in that conversation, but I did include some details about the production of the podcast on the show notes page for that episode. But when I was invited by Q to be a part of the Meet the Podcaster session, I decided to use Wakelet to put together a more in-depth explanation of the why and the how. The Wakelet is linked on my website, blendinginpodcast.com, and I'll also link it on the show notes for this episode if you really want to take a deep dive into the why and how I produce the show. But I'll give you just the highlights in today's episode. In short, the idea for starting a podcast came out of the pandemic. After listening to lots of podcasts for my own entertainment and education during the pandemic, and learning about how teachers were utilizing podcasting with students in their own classrooms, I became curious about how I might utilize a podcast as a form of professional learning for teachers in my role as a technology integration specialist and instructional coach. I had been churning an idea for this podcast during the 2021-2022 school year, but I had no idea where to start. So I did a lot of researching, and I attended the Meet the Podcaster session at Spring Q 2022, where I listened and learned. I stayed after the event and met one of the podcasters, Stacy Kratachoville from the Cappuccino Mic Drop podcast, and I connected with her. Stacy was so kind to share some of her own resources that she had acquired from others, which I have linked on that Wakelet if you're interested to see them. I also met Brent Coley, another IAQ educator who is the host of Teaching Tales podcast. And after chatting with him about how easy it was to record over Zoom and host via Anchor, which is now Spotify for podcasters, I got the confidence boost I needed to begin developing my own podcast. Brent, who is now serving alongside me on the IAQ board of directors, invited me to be a guest on his podcast this last year. I'll link that episode in the show notes as well. So during the spring and summer of 2022, I started listening to podcasts about podcasting to get ideas, and I modified a podcast planner that Stacy had shared with me to begin developing my podcast. I began some deep reflection about how I might be able to use a podcast purposefully in my role as a coach for teachers. Walking classrooms as an instructional coach gave me lots of insights into how other professionals are facilitating teaching and learning with and without technology. I have been able to see firsthand how technology is being used in innovative ways to motivate students to do the hard work of learning. As teachers, we rarely get the chance to see other teachers work their magic in the classroom because we're inside the four walls of our classrooms all day long. So I wanted the podcast to serve as sort of an auditory peek into the classrooms of others and to tap into our collective network of techspertise so we could learn from each other. Also, due to challenges that surfaced during and after the pandemic, it became more difficult for teachers to attend professional development opportunities during the school day due to the lack of substitute teachers. I thought the podcast could serve as a way for teachers to access professional learning asynchronously when it was most convenient for them. Perhaps they could listen to an episode while driving, exercising, or doing household chores like laundry or gardening. That's what I tended to do, so I thought other people might could do that too. Not only did I deeply consider the purpose of this podcast, but I also felt inspired by other educational professionals. For several years, I've been exploring blended learning, and I have found Catlin Tucker's pedagogy around blended learning to be the most well-rounded, actionable approach to giving students more control of their learning while increasing the effectiveness of the teacher and the efficiency of their practice. So as an instructional coach, I've been able to model and coach teachers I work with on various blended learning models, like implementing station rotations, building playlists, trying out flipped instruction, and so on. I also drew inspiration from educators like Casey Bell from Shake Up Learning and Dave Stewart Jr., who has done incredible work around student motivation. Check out my inspiration page on blendinginpodcast.com for more on that. So in my mind, I knew the why behind the podcast, and I had plenty of inspiration. I knew I wanted to interview innovative teachers who were doing amazing things inside the four walls of their classroom with blended learning. But I wasn't sure what the title was going to be. Without a title, I felt stuck. So my amazing EdTech partner, Terry Patterson, was helping me brainstorm one day, and she said, why don't you call it Blending In? Then you could talk about blending in technology, but you could also talk about blending in other things. I loved this idea, and I realized that not including the word technology in the title leaves this podcast so much room to grow. So once I had decided that the title of the podcast was going to be Blending In, the real creative process began. The first step for me was designing the logo. So I used Canva, which is free for educators, to design the cover art first. I continued to use Canva to design other elements like website banners, episode cover art, stickers, and even thank you postcards for guests who appeared on the show. When I was in the classroom, one of my favorite parts of lesson plannings was the graphic design element. Even now, when I'm designing trainings for teachers or creating newsletters for my district, I love the graphic design, and Canva has truly helped increase my graphic design efficiency and inspires more creativity. It's one of my absolute favorite EdTech tools, and really digging in and starting the podcast process was the push I needed to really jump into Canva and see what all it could do. Once I had the title and the look I was going for, then I began searching for the music to give the podcast the feel I wanted my audience to experience. After listening to lots of free options that are available, I wasn't finding the sound I was looking for. There is a band that I've been listening to for years that I thought might be able to provide the sound I was envisioning. So I connected with the lead singer, Joe Hurtler of Joe Hurtler and the Rainbow Seekers, and explained what I was looking for. And he suggested that I use the instrumental version of one of their songs titled Old Love. Which turned out to be the perfect casual upbeat tune I was looking for. So I acquired a license to use the song through MusicBed. Because I'm using this podcast as a way to provide professional development to teachers that I serve in my district, in my role as a technology integration specialist and instructional coach, with approval from the CTO and the director of PD, I'm able to use my Rode mic, Edifier wireless headphones, and my Zoom account that I have through my school district to record my interviews with teachers. I then upload the recordings to WeVideo, which I'm also currently piloting for my school district, for editing and adding music, cover art, and other audio clips. I publish my podcast on Spotify for podcasters, and through this platform, I'm able to distribute Blending In on other platforms like Spotify, iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts, all for free. I'm so grateful that I work for a district that supports innovation and allows me to use some of the tools and resources I have access to produce the show. One thing that I did not anticipate with doing the podcast was actually how much writing was going to be involved. In addition to the podcast tagline and description, I scripted the trailer, the episode intro and outro, and the episode template that I provided to guests that I interviewed. I've shared the basic template on my Wakelet, but depending on the guests that's coming on, I occasionally revise some of the questions or added questions to the list. I also do a lot of writing after I interview guests to create the show notes for each episode. Because I was spending so much time writing elements for the show and with all the responsibilities I have in my role in my district and on the IAQ board, and also being a mom of 3, I ended up putting my blog on the back burner. I had to give myself some grace with that and realize that I can't do all the things I want to do simultaneously, and that's okay. There are some other details on the Wakelet you can explore if you want to know more about the production of Blending In, and if you're thinking about starting a podcast yourself and you have questions, feel free to check out that Wakelet or connect with me on socials or email me at contact@blendinginpodcast.com. Also, one more thing, there are costs associated with maintaining the podcast that are not covered by my school district, and I am producing the show solely by myself without the help of a production company. So if you'd like to support me with production costs, feel free to donate to help me keep this running. With that said, I obviously don't do this podcast for any financial gain. I have a passion for supporting teachers and students, and I have truly enjoyed the creative process of producing this show and providing teachers a platform to share their innovative practices. So speaking of those innovative practices, in this first season of Blending In, I was able to interview 4 elementary teachers, 5 middle school teachers, 2 high school teachers, an instructional coach, and a principal. 3 of my wonderful middle school colleagues were the first of the brave souls that I reached out to for an interview. Erin Carr was my first guest who set the tone of the season for us by sharing the Starfish poem, reminding us that to be successful in schooling all of our starfish, we must get to know our students and create learning communities where students feel like they belong. And she shared some great EdTech games, strategies, and tools that can help us do that. My next guest, John Moreau, shared how he uses video instruction in his math class to create more student agency in his digital dojo, and how he blends in the concepts of respect and redemption. Then on episode 3, one of our outstanding social studies teachers, Samia Muhareb, shared some of innovative ways that she keeps students engaged and makes history come to life through providing opportunities for virtual field trips or museum tours and video conferencing with real-life judges to conduct virtual mock trials. These 3 middle school teachers shared some great ways to blend in rock-solid pedagogy with technology to engage and motivate their students. My first elementary guest, Kimberly Vanaman, shared the same sentiments, but she also discussed how the technology was actually making her job as a teacher easier. Lord knows we have a million things to do as teachers, so go back and listen to episode 4 to hear how Kimberly uses technology to simplify her teacher life. So far, the most listened to episode has been episode 5, which was my interview with elementary PE teacher Erin Coyle, titled Adapting to Technology in PE. It was fascinating to listen to Erin talking about how he's blending in tech tools to help with things like strategic grouping, pre-recording his warm-up activities so he could essentially duplicate himself, and printing and laminating student-friendly I can statements that he can take outside to help him reinforce that although PE is the fun class, it's also a place where kids are learning knowledge and skills. This was a great episode and definitely one of the most memorable from the season. Like Erin, Bryce Bovey has figured out which EdTech tools best help him meet the instructional goals he has in his science classroom. He reminded us that a consistent recipe for a typical daily lesson with the use of specific, simple ingredients, like a Google Slides lesson builder with embedded digital timers, can be the recipe for success that helps keep students on track and progressing in their learning. About halfway through the production of the podcast, through the IAQ organization, I got the opportunity to do my very first panel interview with a live audience at the Reimagine EDU conference. I got to include Dr. Tina Brown, who is an instructional coach with me here in my district, alongside Lisa Moe, who is known for the innovative ways that she gamifies learning for her students, and Kevin Roten, who is an award-winning high school social studies teacher and author of Teach with Magic. This panel had an amazing discussion about how to combine voice and choice with innovative instructional techniques to keep students motivated and engaged. This was a magical conversation. And speaking of magic, Mikkel Bromley, a dynamic fourth grade teacher in our district, shared in her episode how she makes the magic of STEAM and blended learning happen in her classroom, and how collaboration with her colleagues makes this possible. Just like previous guests, Mikkel also shared how efficient use of tech tools saves her a lot of time. This season, I also got the privilege of interviewing online and hybrid teacher Gerardo Saldana in episode 8 and his principal, John Bradshaw, from our Academy of Innovation in episode 9. And these two gentlemen provided some insights into how they blend in STEAM, esports, and SEL into the broad scope and complex dimensions of blended learning models that are happening at their unique school site. The last episode that I recorded this season was with another fellow IAQ board member who is also a teacher in my school district. Ann Rizakaza and I were at Spring Q together and recorded this episode early one morning over coffee in my hotel room before heading to the conference. Ann shared all about how she's blended in podcasting with our high school biology students. Although the sound quality of this episode wasn't the best, if you want to be inspired and get ideas for how you can incorporate podcasting with your students, you must listen to this episode. Well, thank you so much for listening to season 1 of Blending In and for making it all the way to the end of this recap episode. I absolutely love producing this podcast and being able to highlight some amazing educators who are amplifying learning experiences in their classroom by blending in good pedagogy with meaningful use of technology. If you know a teacher who should be a guest on the podcast, please submit a nomination form on blendinginpodcast.com. I'd love to chat with them on the show. As you heard today, I'm producing the show all by myself, so it would mean the world to my little amateur podcaster heart to have your support. You can support by listening to episodes and subscribing on your preferred platform. You can also share episodes with your educator friends and family, and you can follow the podcast on social media. You can even support by making a monetary donation. Any support that you offer will help me continue to produce this show to inspire educators to innovate and integrate. Thanks again for listening today, and I hope you'll tune back in for season 2 of Blending In. Have a great day.